All right, welcome back to another episode of the Jacob Johnston Show. Yes, and we're going to be going through quite a bit here, kind of analyzing the situation that has been going on in this country for quite some time. Now, while I go through this, I will be trying to monitor the chat and being able to answer or address questions that are actually relevant to what we're talking about. Questions that are off topic, I'll generally, kind of ignore at the moment, mainly because on the last stream, I was constantly getting a little sidetracked with questions in the chat that were not relevant to the topic of the show. And as I analyzed that, it seemed like, it kind of distracted from the show itself. So here we're going to go through and analyze mostly the claim of the Democrats that there's systemic racism and that the country was founded on racism, and therefore we need to tear everything down and start all over, which I will give you the bottom line up front. This whole issue of systemic racism is the Democrats creating a distraction from the complete and total failure of their policies. But what's worse is that their policies are designed to be complete and total failures. But in order to distract you, it's not the policies, it's the entire system that's wrong. Which, when you analyze it, it's not the entire system. It's only the pockets of the country that are exclusively controlled by Democrats in which the problems occur. So we're going to go through here and take a look at this. Now, first off, they always want to go off and talk about America's original sin, slavery. Now, look, there was a lot of things to go on and talk about when it comes to slavery in America's past, but it's not like slavery was something new and exclusive to the United States. That was the state of the world for 5,000 years. In fact, there are still places in the world right now where slavery is still practiced. And so going off and saying that, that somehow America is uniquely, responsible for the atrocities of slavery when that was something that went on worldwide for thousands of years before the founding of the United States. And yet the United States was the leading country to end slavery in most of the world. It's kind of one of those, hey, you're kind of not exactly looking at the entire history. And, America's founding fathers came from countries in which, or initially from countries in which slavery was the norm for thousands of years. So, yeah, it took them a little bit of time to recognize that, hey, this is bad. And at the Constitutional Convention for the founding of this country, there was a large number of people trying to end slavery at the foundation, but they couldn't get enough support to make it happen. And they ended up having to decide, whether to allow the state of the world, to continue, the state of the world that has been the norm for 5,000 years, to continue and have a solidified country to protect them from the British Empire trying to retake back the land, or to stick to their guns on ending slavery and end up fracturing this newly formed and fragile country into two, in which case leave them weak and vulnerable to invasion. And so they had to choose a difficult choice here with the hopes that future generations would end this horrific practice and, fulfill the promise of all people created equal. It's not like it was an easy choice. It was a hard, difficult choice. Now, in going through with that, another thing that the left tries to claim is that, it's America at large that was responsible for slavery. No, it wasn't. You had the entire half of the country north, which had the same, population makeup of the South, but the North, there was no slavery. There was no slave owners. It was a practice that was outlawed and abandoned. Now, we could talk about the road of getting there, before the South, and some of the obstacles where some people tried to create laws that prevented, people from freeing their slaves. So they had to go through, a practice where they couldn't, free their slaves, and so they didn't want to hand them over to somebody who may mistreat them. So they tried to treat them as much as employees. And then when they passed away, the slaves would then become free, and their family would just never get more slaves. And that's how a large part of the process of, ending slavery in the North after the founding of the country is just letting, the slave owner pass away and no other family member gaining slaves, since they couldn't free them by law. And we can go through and talk about that. We could talk about how in the South, how many black slave owners there were. We could talk about that there were actually white slaves as well and all that. But all of this comes down to take a look that slavery was less racial issue than what the left is trying to preach, and more of an ideological issue, where you had the people of the North that believed heavily in the founding statements of all people created equal and wanting to abandon the sins of the rest of the world, while the Democrat South, and I say Democrat South, but I don't say Republican North, because the Republicans were not established for a large part of the time that slavery took place. The Republican Party hadn't been founded yet. And the Democrat South, which believed more on class systems, that your life was determined by the family that you were born into. They, went along with the rest of the world's history of, slavery, enslavement, and, and it was more of an ideological of the privileged elitists got to run everything and have all the luxuries. To the Democrat South, the being a slave owner was equivalent to being a Hollywood elitist with a private jet. All right. It was more of a class elitist, type mentality. Now, as time goes on and the racial makeups of the slaves, kind of, changed over time, yes, but then we get to what had happened, and that is the establishment of the Republican Party, who then went off and, was founded on the idea that no slavery anywhere. We got to the Civil War, which, by the way, contrary to what the left wants to everyone to believe, that it was America at large or whatever, you had half the country, the North, going to war, risking their lives to end slavery, and the other half of the country, the South. So it wasn't systemic all over the place, in every state, city, or whatever. And even in the South, only the 1%, the richest 1% could actually afford it, could actually afford to own slaves. So it was more of, like I said, like what we would equate to Hollywood elitists today owning a private jet. It was an ideological thing. Now, fast forward, after the Civil War, slavery's ended, right? And now the Democrats, they had to find another way in order to promote, this hierarchical, privileged versus non-privileged, type of class. And it would be kind of hard for the slaves that were actually white to continue to be discriminated against, because it gets hard to distinguish, when they look just like your neighbor, when they are your neighbors, when they, live right next door working in the same occupation. So that's when it became heavily about race, and going through as the Democrats instigated segregation, created Jim Crow laws, and went off and founded the KKK as a paramilitary group to enforce the Democrats' ideology of superiority, hierarchical superiority. And we see a lot of that, reformed today, with the Democrats creating a hierarchy of victim groups. And depending on what victim group or how many different victim groups you can claim to belong to depends on how much more, your views and opinions are worth compared to other people. And then Antifa, which just like the KKK uses violence and terrorist tactics in order to implement compliance into the Democrats' ideology, and viciously attacking anybody to dare speak their mind, to use basic fear and intimidation through violence in order to silence opposition, to force a basic agreement, or this view that there's an agreement, because if you disagree, well, just like everyone else, you're too afraid to speak up. So therefore, not hearing other people disagree must mean that everybody else agrees and, you can't speak up. So we had, segregation, Jim Crow, and, that again took time because this was an ideological battle between, what had become the Republican Party, believing in the idea that all people are created equal, versus the Democrats' ideology of elitism and people, having different values and worth. Well, over time, and I know I'm kind of glossing over the history because I want to get to today where there was an actual shift, right? Now, over time, segregation, Jim Crow, and all that became politically toxic for the Democrats. And the Democrats eventually had to abandon all of that when the Republicans, through hard work, effort, and ideological battles, were able to win the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Not once, but 2 Civil Rights Acts. Right? So now the Democrats, they were in this situation here where, what they had been preaching since the founding of the country had become politically toxic. And that preaching that based off of racial divisions became politically toxic. People rejected it by and large. And so they knew they couldn't continue that. But they knew the basic premise of what they were doing was still viable. So this is where we get into the first, transition for the Democrats, which is they didn't really change their views. They just changed their marketing strategy, whereby targeting the Black community wasn't about, race superiority or whatever. No. They could target the Black community and then just market it as helping the Black community. They can enact policies that were designed to discourage, family cohesion, that were designed to keep their population under control. You take a look at Planned Parenthood, that's all about population control for minorities, but it's celebrated as a women's right to choose. You see the marketing strategy, and, it would be like the left suddenly decide that they're going to celebrate Hitler because he, marketed the Nazis as an anti-hate group. They were still slaughtering the Jews, but as long as they claimed to be anti-hate, they would be celebrated with today's Democrat Party, because it's more about what they say rather than what they do as part of their marketing. So they could make it financially the Democrats made it financial disincentives for marriage, strong family values, and then started targeting the Black community to erode family cohesion, to keep population down. And they would go through and, try and target the education systems, right? And by remarketing their attacks on the Black community as somehow being pro-Black community, they were able to gain a little bit of support. Now, with the left having, control of the school system, what could they do? They could slowly rewrite and edit history to fit their political narratives, editing out, the Democrat Party's involvement, tried to generalize it, as white America, responsible for the sins in general, making slow and small edits. And then as these, kids going through that edited history grew up, they started getting into positions in journalism, communication, academia, and they would write their own interpretations and edit. And there was a slow writing. And then, the Democrats realized that with control of the education system, they could preach from birth victimhood mentality. That if they could teach, the community from birth that, hey, you're going to be a victim. Because of the color of your skin, you can't get anywhere. The system is against you. So there's no need to even try. And so they raise them up with this message of hopelessness, right? But they also say, hey, but you know what? If you vote Democrat, we'll be able to fix all of this. And as they went through with this marketing strategy, whereby they could damage the Black community and yet convince them that it was helping them and that voting for Democrats would solve all the problems, they started seeing this political benefit to their marketing strategy, where the people that they were damaging the most destructive to, would celebrate them and reward them, because they wouldn't pay attention to the actual policies or the results. They were only paying attention to the marketing. And then they started realizing, hey, we could take this a little further. And this is where we start getting into third wave, current day Democrats, where now what they preach, they're damaging of the Black community, and has been expanded, beyond just the Black community. But it's no longer an issue of, a belief of racial superiority for the Democrats. The Democrats are no longer, doing it just because, of, blanket hate and racism. They're doing it now just because of money. That's it. They found out that it was not only politically beneficial, but it was highly profitable. And they started realizing that they could not only, benefit politically from inflicting as much pain and suffering as possible in a particular community, but that these communities, because of the marketing strategy, would give what little money that they had up to the Democrats if they just promised to solve it. And so now you see here that throughout the United States, the pockets of the country in which, we do see instances of police brutality, where we do see instances of, certain communities like the Black community suffering the most, having the least opportunities, are doing the worst financially, are in areas exclusively controlled by Democrats, where Democrats pretty much hold almost every elected office, every position of power within that particular county. And like what we see with George Floyd, in an area that is almost exclusively controlled by the Democrats, they go out there and they promote all of this chaos and violence. And what's their solution? Just vote more Democrats. Well, there's almost no positions left available that Democrats haven't already occupied, right? And so they get the campaign donations, they get the political power, and as long as they keep inflicting pain and suffering, knowing that, their past efforts has raised an ignorant generation that, that don't really know the history, but are willing to go along with an inequality today for the financial incentives, like the people at the New York Times. They don't care about anything except for making money. As long as they can virtue signal, edit the news, and block, information. And this is what online censorship is about, where the news media, of the old, along with social media today, filter, edit, spin, and all of that to create a narrative, right? In order to distract from the failures of the Democrat Party in the areas. And a large part of this comes from when I read this article. Record ratings and record chaos on cable news, right? And so the news media, whether it's the New York Times, whether it's CNN, all of that, they benefit financially from this, because what happens? They promoted the victimhood to to identity groups, and especially to the Black community. They lied about the number of police incidents as involving members of the Black community. They promote this idea of systemic racism and all of that. And what happens when one instance does actually happen? Chaos completely erupts, because people think this is happening on a normal basis. They feel frustrated, even though that's not the truth. But they believe it to be true because that's what they've been told their entire lives. So they start burning down their own neighborhoods. They start, and I get a lot of it has to do with Antifa and all that, but all of the violence, chaos, all of the arsons that has gone on, what has that done? That's created compelling TV for CNN, NBC, whose ratings have gone up because people are tuning in to watch the chaos. That means their ad revenues go up, because now that their ratings have gone up, they can charge more for people to advertise on their networks, and that increases ratings. In fact, you can go back and take a look at instances and during past riots and all of that, and you can always see a spike in the profits of the cable news networks, and you could see increased profits of the print media as well. They have a financial incentive, because the angrier they can make you with false narratives, and the more that they can bring you to the brink of violence, the closer they get you, the more money they make. And then once they push you over the edge, you're burning down your own community. And the people at the New York Times, the head of CNN, they're just counting their cash going, suckers. They're making bank off of this. And then we see the Democrats, they're out there going, hey, just vote for more of us. We'll solve this. And the media is going to sell the idea that this is somehow, because of Trump or Republicans or whatever. Therefore, vote more Democrats so that they can, create more pain and suffering, so that you'll riot more, so that CNN and all that can make more money off of the footage, off of the chaos of people tuning in. It's really quite an amazing situation when you think about it. Now you're also going, but hey, there are a number of Black people out there trying to make a difference. They're creating these civil rights groups, right? They're creating all of these activist groups to solve the problems. Are they? Ask yourself this. Let's say we cured racism altogether. What happens to all those civil rights groups? Oh, all their money dries up. You mean if they actually solve the problem, all that money, all the millions of dollars these particular groups bring in, claiming that they're trying to, end injustice and inequality, dries up. Their money flow goes away, and they would have to get real jobs. So they actually have a financial incentive to ensure that the problem never really goes away, never completely gets solved. Because we're talking about, easily, $1 billion industry, of donations to all these groups claiming to be fighting against the repression of all these victim groups. But they never actually promote any policy that would solve anything. I mean, think about what's going on right now. They're promoting defund the police. What do you think that's going to do? Okay, so they rioted. They burnt down their community after, years and decades of being preached that everybody's against them and they won't be allowed to go anywhere, even though that couldn't be further from the truth. They looted all these businesses. They burnt them down. And now they're trying to say, abolish the police, right? But what is going to be the effects of those actions? Well, businesses are looking at this going like, you stole our stuff, you burnt down our buildings, and now you're abolishing the police? We're not coming back here. You would have to be insane to reopen a business in this community. What does that mean? That means less jobs. That means because of less jobs, there's less people earning incomes. That means less tax money for the government. That means there's not going to be anybody investing on cleaning up all the damage that was created. You're going to create issues of high poverty because the jobs aren't going to come back there. And what jobs remain are going to have high security, bulletproof windows, security badges, private security, and, only people with an actual business need, not open to the general consumer, but only people that they have business meetings with, from other companies and employees are going to be allowed in and out of those buildings. I mean, they're going to have high security businesses there, but as far as, consumer products, those businesses aren't coming back. The bars won't come back, after you completely destroyed them. So you're going to have burnt down communities in ruin, jobs that aren't going to come back to the area because of what happened, and, getting rid of the police. What does that create? That creates more pain and suffering in that community. And you can look up, in that particular community, what is the racial makeup? Well, you have a high percentage of minorities. That's going to create more financial pain and suffering. But the Democrats, they're promoting this as a solution. They're going out there and they're promoting this as the way forward. Why? Because they know it's just going to cause more problems. More problems that they can go out there and say, hey, donate to our group. And, because we'll advocate to end all these new problems that arise. You'll have the media and the Democrat Party, going out there and saying, hey, this is the result of, capitalism. Hey, this is, what systemic, racism and oppression looks like, neglected communities and all of that. And therefore, just vote more for us, for the Democrats to gain more political power. And it gives the media a narrative in which to build up enough, anger to promote the next riot from which they make their big payday off of. You see, what started off for the Democrat Party as an ideological issue of, class system, of importance, moving on to racial divide, has now, morphed where they're still doing the same things. They just changed the marketing, and the incentive went from those things that I mentioned in the past to just pure money. And as long as racism and inequality continues to lead to, being able to turn that around in a manipulative fashion through marketing towards more, political power for them, more money, for their groups who have no interest in solving problems because they want the money to keep flowing, which only happens as long as the problem exists. And as long as those who control information and the, cable news, print media, and you take a look at Twitter and Facebook, they also have a profit incentive, for, for all of this as well, because what goes on, these riots happen, right? what, and so when people can't watch TV, or they're not subscribed, and for those who aren't subscribed to the print media, what are they doing? They're checking their Twitter feed, which does get the latest update on what's going on, the latest videos. And what's happening? You're getting delivered ads. You're getting delivered ads so that they make money. You're checking your Facebook more. Facebook's making more money because you're wanting to see what's going on. It's all the pain and suffering that the left causes is just a financial incentive. All right, so we got a person here. Black Lives Matter is a ploy to gain votes for the left. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to Black Lives Matter, I get what the messaging is, Black Lives Matter and all that. The problem that I have, with the name, and then I'll get, to the group itself. The problem I have with the name is that when you qualify, what matters based off of identity, such as skin color, gender, occupation, you're trying to create a priority list of whose lives matter more than others. And the Democrats, they seem to want to just reshuffle the priority list. Same oppression, different priority levels, versus the all lives matter. Now, I get some people want to argue, well, we want to focus on, like when we say save this rainforest, it's not that other rainforests don't matter. It's just this one needs the most attention. And then here's where I get to the group. Yes, but if you focus on just that particular rainforest, and people who are the main group in charge of trying to preserve that rainforest, and see the money coming in and how much money they're able to pocket and how little they actually need to do, they then have an incentive to declare that no matter what happens, it's not enough. That particular rainforest, will never be healed enough, will always be worse off than any other rainforest anywhere in the world. Why? Because the moment the problem for that rainforest is solved, or the conditions for that rainforest become better than other rainforests, and they admit that means the money for them dries up and starts going over to this next rainforest. And so when we take a look at Black Lives Matter, and I will go through and I will trust that maybe there was a genuine thought process, behind it, and that it had, good intentions. The problem is, just like with all left-wing groups, they saw money coming in, especially, for the larger chapters, and they realized, hey, what? If we solve the problems, if we actually get real solutions, this money could go away. And so, there is a financial, motive to keep the problems going. Now, as far as it being a ploy, for votes for the left, yes, that is true as well, because we see that where the left is, in control of almost everything, that's where the biggest problems are, because the left, they realize this profit incentive to create pain and suffering. They realize that people who are suffering are easy to manipulate, and they realize, that they can control, since they, only had to take control of, the education system and media, most of the cable news network and social media, which is why they're putting so much pressure on Facebook and Twitter and all of that, because they want to censor out truth. They want to censor out debate. They just want to, create suffering and then tell you, oh, it's because of, not because of the policies, but It's a systemic problem that cannot be solved without tearing everything down and starting over. Right? It's a systemic problem of, Republicans, never mind that they have zero control in this area. They're always able to shift the blame. And the, solution is always vote more Democrats. The solution is donate more of what money you have left to Democrats, to this left-wing organization. And the left-wing organizations, like when it comes to Black Lives Matter, and, you could pick any other rights groups, even, groups that are talking about, feminist groups, as well. What goes on? They promote, as if nothing's changed. They go off and say, hey, donate to me. We'll advocate for these policies, which if we actually if we actually solve the problem, the money goes away. So, whatever, we're not going to actually solve the problem. But as they rake in the money, they make sure to contribute part of that to the Democrat Party. And the Democrat Party, in return, promotes that group as a legitimate group, promotes that group as, being a real civil rights group. Because now the Democrats, in creating this alliance, right, go through and promote this group as, leaders of that community, advocating for equality, convinces a lot of people to donate money to that group. That group has a financial incentive to make sure problems don't get solved. They take a portion of that money to donate to the Democrats, so that Democrats will get elected, create more problems, help promote that group and themselves as the solution to the problems that they themselves are creating. See, it's all about the money now, right? And like I said, with feminist groups, they keep promoting this whole women only make 79 cents on the dollar to a man, right? That is decades out of date information. Right now, women, if you actually go through and look at the data, apples to apples comparison, same education, same number of years experience, they make the same money. In fact, there's also a lot of cases where women are actually earning more than men, even though they have the same qualifications. Right? But they keep promoting that. Why? Because if the mission of women's equality is fulfilled, mission accomplished, what happens to all of the money that's going to all of these feminist groups? Well, if the mission is accomplished, why do I need to keep donating to you? All right, so the money goes away. The organization goes under because no money's coming in. What are they going to do for a job? You see where the financial incentives is all about keeping inequality going? For the left, all the financial incentives. Now, the Republicans, on the other hand, have a financial incentive to end discrimination and inequality. Why? Well, let's take a look at the Republican philosophy and motivation. We believe limited government, and we believe that the government that should have the most, influence over your life is your local government, where you have more voice, more say, can actually see them in person, right? But we want limited government. Why? Because we don't want this behemoth government that needs to take more and more of your money. We want the money to stay with you. Why? So that you have money to spend. Because while Democrats are focused on, by and large, building up organizations, that are like civil rights groups, which require constant donations, in which they do almost nothing back in return, except for what? Every once in a while organize a march. Woo, that's a real complicated process. So they bank a lot of money and not do much in return, but do the marketing. What do Republicans and conservatives and all that believe in? Building businesses, building products. Well, we want you to have more money in your pocket so that we can compete based off of products and services for that money that adds value to your life. We want to build the computer that you believe will provide you the most benefits to suit your needs of what you want to do. We want to build the infrastructure that allows you to go out and create more money for yourself so that you have more money to spend on products, goods, and services, and that you're going to spend that money based off of what is important to you, what's going to create conveniences in your life, what is going to provide you that entertainment, and we want to provide the best of that. So that requires you being able to keep a hold of more of your own money so that you can make those decisions as far as what are the things that you value most that you want. Democrats want you to have as little money as possible so that you are suffering as much as possible, and then convince you to donate what little you have left to these industries, which, by the way, when we talk about, these big groups and organizations that try to market themselves as leaders of these particular communities trying to solve these problems, while yes, they're getting some money and donations from within that community or from within that city, their real big, financial paydays come from places like the Hollywood elites, who want to donate to these groups for virtue signaling. And if they don't donate, and this is the Al Sharpton tactic, well, then they're racist. Where Al Sharpton would go around and say, donate to my group, or I'm going to accuse you of being racist. I'm going to accuse you of not, being an ally for the cause. I'm going to accuse you of being part of the problem. But if you donate to me, hey, you're a great person, and I'll say as much. And so then you get, these, rich elitists, who through virtue signaling is helping to keep these organizations funded the most. So I'm not sure if I clarified, about that. Example is WHO. All right, I'm assuming you mean WHO as in World Health Organization, because it's all capitalized and you're not going example is who, because, without a question mark. So I will go through and, take this as, because it's all capitalized and no question mark, as World Health Organization. Yes, they have an incentive not to actually solve problems. Take a look at all of the money and the donations that are coming in. And then take a look at what happened with the coronavirus. How at first they tried to say, no, there's no evidence that this is human-to-human transmissible. Why? Because of China. China's telling us such. Well, why were they parroting what China said? Because China provides millions of dollars to their organization. So they don't want to make them mad. And they realize that are at least had believed all the way up until Trump that it doesn't matter what they say or do or how they behave, the United States will always provide the money. So America is guaranteed no matter what they do or what they say. So then it's about, who the next biggest donors are, and then promoting what that is, and then saying, oh, no, you don't need to wear masks. Masks are, not important, the WHO says. Well, turns out a lot of masks are made in China. And then all of a sudden, yes, you need masks. You need masks. They do a complete 180 on that. If you notice all of the missteps, mistakes, all of the misinformation that the WHO promoted was all in China's favor. And you take a look at, China, if you were to say that, the United States is guaranteed money no matter what you do, so it doesn't matter if you pander to them or not. But China, let's say they're second or third, largest contributor, and their money is dependent upon you parroting whatever it is they want you to say. Well, then you're going to parrot, whoever's money is not guaranteed, the biggest donor who's not guaranteed, in order to do so. And then, you take a look at what they were saying. We need to have all these lockdowns, these, all these, closures, social distancing. But then the moment that there was a left-wing cause, such as, what happened to George Floyd, so that people want to protest, burn down buildings and all that, suddenly social distancing doesn't matter. Suddenly, no. Asymptomatic people are suddenly no longer contagious, unlike what we were told before the riots and all of that. And so, again, this goes through, and I'm glad you brought this up, about the WHO, where, what they were saying and what they were doing was not based off of scientific evidence, but just parroting the narrative of whoever their money's coming from. Parroting just whatever the left wants them to. And what was the result of what happened with the WHO, right? What happened as the WHO was spreading misinformation, censoring, flip-flopping back and forth based off of where money was coming from? What happened? Celebrities like Lady Gaga had gone out there and raised millions of dollars in donations for the WHO. So they were going off purposely, giving off misinformation for political motivated reasons, that were tied to their financial incentives. And as a result of them doing so and bowing down to China, they still got, American celebrities, to raise up money to donate to the WHO, virtue signaling, right? So they profited. You see how there is example after example after example of there being financial incentives for them to not only ensure that problems don't get solved, but when problems do get solved, deny that they were solved. It's follow the money is all you need to do. All right, let's see here. The left looked at China as the desired model for the Western world. Okay, so let me get to that for a moment. This is where, I get the point that you're making there. All right. And I know I said at the beginning of this broadcast, I wasn't going to take, things that were off topic from this. But I believe I can tie in this statement about China being the desired model for the Western world and tie it back into everything else I was saying. Because China, the China model, is not an original thought to China. You can go back and take a look at China's, surveillance state, information control, and all of that, and you could pretty much go back to the book 1984, the Orwellian society. And that is what the left's true, desire for the Western world. An Orwellian society, the 1984, the Big Brother. They just look at China and see how well they have implemented that Orwellian vision. All right. So I hope maybe that helps and clarifies things. Where are we at for time? About 48 minutes, about 50 minutes at this particular point. So I hope I've made my point here. And, it was in reading this that it really sparked that connection between why things, why the inequalities, the police brutalities and all of that happen in pockets that are almost exclusively controlled by Democrats, and why it is they keep doing that, and why it is they promote the insane policies that they do as solutions to these particular problems, even though everyone's looking at, this whole defund the police, disband the police, and everybody already can see that this is going to be a complete disaster, right? There's no mystery that it's going to be a complete disaster. There's no debate about whether or not it's going to be a complete disaster. We see the complete disaster coming. I mean, it's easy to see. It's clear as day. But they got people worked up so much in a frenzy because emotion, and anger being one of the most powerful emotions, overrides all logic and thinking. And if you can get people angry enough, you can get them to pretty much support anything that as a solution, even though what they're claiming as a solution is only going to create massively more problems. And we see other left-wing cities taking a look at this and going, oh, this is brilliant. The chaos, the destruction, the devastation that this will cause, we'll be able to campaign on that for decades, to come. We'll be able to fundraise off of all of that destruction for the next decade, at least. This is a decade and multi-billions of dollars worth of fundraising off of the problems that what they are wanting to implement now is going to cause. And so, yeah, the attacks on the black community throughout the history of the United States, has evolved on the left from being an issue of class and privilege to a racial issue to morphing to, a financial issue. What they're doing is all the same. The only thing that's changed for the left is the motivation and the marketing. Of course, we could always say that the motivation was probably always about money. Even back during slavery, the motivation for the left was probably about money, cheap labor. We could talk about, during segregation and Jim Crow, that there was probably money and profit incentive for that as well. So, while there was always this, hate and needing to put other people down for them to feel better, the money incentive, I guess, has always been there for the left to create oppression and inequality. So really the only thing that's changed for the left since the time of slavery to now is their marketing tactics. That's really all that's changed is their marketing tactics. What gender is... All right, let me get in a closer look. It's not. There's only two genders, by the way. Two genders. Male, female. That's it. That's the only two genders. And I know some of you are going to go hermaphrodite, right? Well, that's still a combination of those two genders. That's it. Two genders. It's kind of funny. The left wants to, confuse all of this, with their, with this whole transgenderism, 52 genders and all of that. And yet they want to claim it's the right wing that's anti-science, which, I'm not getting into the whole gender thing. Like I said at the very beginning of this, I'm only going to be really responding to things that are on topic. I'm not going to go for the off topic distractions, so okay. So in any event, that's really all there is for this particular episode. I hope that wherever you're watching this, whether it's on YouTube, Periscope, Twitch, that you go ahead, you hit subscribe, you hit notification bells. If you catch the audio version of this, in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and all the other places, go ahead, leave me ratings and reviews as well. Now, I will say one thing here that is off topic. All right, for those of you who are, wondering here, because I'm responding to chats and some of you may not see it. I use restream.io to stream to multiple platforms at once, YouTube, Periscope, and Twitch. And Restream actually integrates having a plugin with OBS, right? And part of that is taking the chats from all the different places and putting it into one chat stream and having that chat stream, right here on OBS, which is very nice because I see people, right now, there's another person with the same first name as me, Jacob, on Periscope. There's eGuest4 on Twitch, going through Smurf Who, also on Twitch. And there's a couple of people on Facebook, and I can tell what platform they're going on because it provides the icon of the platform right next to what it is they're typing, right? But in any event, for those of you who want to catch the audio version, it's the Jacob Johnston Show. Again, you can get it pretty much where all podcasts are available, and that is the place where my show actually, makes money from advertisement revenue. So if you want to help support the show and you don't want to, donate directly through, payment processors like, PayPal.me or I forget some of the other places here off the top of my head, but pretty much all the other places. I mean, if you don't want to donate directly, but you just want to help support the show, you can download the audio version of the podcast, and it's the ad revenues. That is one good thing. I should put a link in some show notes. I should create an online store for. Let me ask, for those of you who are watching this live, would you want a merchandise store? T-shirts, hats, hoodies, mugs. Is that something that you guys, really are interested in or not? Just kind of asking, versus going the Patreon route or something. What do you think? Should think about that. Now, also, I know I don't promote this much, but I also have other podcasts that are very have gained quite a bit in popularity. That could be Sexmancers. That is a popular podcast that does have a merchandise store and a book, by the way. So, I mean, these are ways in which you can, help support. You can also, subscribe, or follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Wherever it is you want to connect with me, it'll either be under the handle The Jacob Johnston Show or The Alteran, right? Yes, it's called The Alteran, and it's an inside thing. And for those of you who haven't, been on here before, look it up, right? Look it up. Now, let's see here. If it had a good message, I would be interested in merchandise. Yes. Okay. What about a funny message? Funny messages and good messages, or just good messages? Just a bit of a thought there. So, all right. So maybe I'll work on a merchandise store here and, put up a few items, for that. All right. But in any event, I've gone a little bit over with this end of the show rant, just a little bit our, random conversation and talk. I'm going to end the part that will go up on audio now. And instead, I will just go ahead and answer questions for the live stream. So for those of you who will be listening to the audio, thank you so much, and I will be back again soon. All right.